The judge's gavel came down, and I felt my entire life collapse in a single sound. $30 million. My company. My employees. My daughter's future. All of it balanced on the testimony of a woman I hadn't seen in 20 years. A woman I had once held in my arms when she was nothing but a scared, hungry child sleeping on a park bench. She walked into that courtroom, looking like a stranger. Expensive suit. Confident posture. Eyes that held none of the fear I remembered. And then she opened her mouth. What she said in those next 5 minutes didn't just save my empire. It revealed a secret so devastating that I almost wished she had stayed silent. But she didn't stay silent. She spoke the truth that I had buried so deep I had forgotten it existed. Stick with me while I share my story. My name is Elena Vasquez, and for most of my life, I believed that hard work and sacrifice were enough to build something unbreakable. I was a single mother living in Phoenix, struggling to keep our small family afloat. My daughter, Isabella, was my entire world. I worked double shifts at a diner, cleaned houses on weekends, and scraped together every penny I could. But the universe has a strange way of testing the people who are already running on empty. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything changed. I was walking home from my second job, exhausted and counting the hours until my next shift. The streets were quiet, and the Arizona autumn had finally brought some relief from the brutal heat. That's when I noticed her. A small figure huddled on a bench near the bus stop. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Her clothes were torn, her shoes were falling apart, and her hair was matted with dirt. She was shivering even though the temperature was still in the 70s. I almost kept walking. God forgive me, I almost walked right past her. I had my own problems. I had a daughter waiting at home. I had bills I couldn't pay. I had nothing to give anyone else. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she hugged her knees to her chest. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes when she looked up and saw me approaching. I crouched down in front of her and asked a simple question. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me like she was trying to decide if I was a threat or a lifeline. I tried again. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" She shook her head slowly. "My name is Elena," I said. "What's yours?" She whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it, but I caught the word. Her name was Maya. I didn't know then that this name would become the most important word in my life. I didn't know that this scared, broken girl would one day walk into a courtroom and save everything I had built. And I certainly didn't know that her presence would also bring the truth to light, a truth I had spent 2 decades running from. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to who I was before Maya entered my life. I was 24 years old when I had Isabella. Her father was a man I met at a party, a charming guy who promised the world and delivered nothing but heartbreak. When I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared faster than I could blink. I raised Isabella alone. We lived in a cramped apartment on the bad side of Phoenix. The walls were thin, the plumbing was unreliable, and the landlord was always threatening to evict us. But I decorated Isabella's room with fairy lights and painted butterflies on the walls. I wanted her to feel magic even when there was none. I worked at a diner called Rosie's, a greasy spoon that served coffee strong enough to strip paint. My shift started at 5 in the morning, and I was usually home by 3 in the afternoon so I could pick Isabella up from school. But the money wasn't enough. So I started cleaning houses on Saturdays. I was always tired, always worried, always calculating how many hours I needed to work to keep the lights on. But I loved my daughter more than anything in this world. And I believed that if I kept pushing, kept working, kept sacrificing, eventually things would get better. That was my plan. Work hard, raise Isabella right, and somehow make a life we could be proud of. Then Maya appeared on that park bench, and my plan went out the window. That first night, I didn't know what to do with Maya. She was too scared to speak more than a few words. I brought her home, fed her leftover spaghetti, and gave her a warm bath. When she stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in an old towel, she looked like a different person. I could see the face beneath the dirt. She was beautiful. Dark eyes, high cheekbones, a small scar above her eyebrow. She kept her head down, like she was ashamed of existing. Isabella was curious but shy. She'd never met anyone like Maya before. She sat on the floor of the living room, watching Maya eat like she was studying a rare creature. That night, I let Maya sleep on the couch. I tucked a blanket around her and told her she was safe. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. She'd been hurt too many times to trust anyone. But she stayed. The next morning, I called the police. I didn't want to get in trouble for harboring a runaway. The officer who answered listened to my story and told me they'd send someone over. "You're doing the right thing," he said. The social worker arrived 2 hours later. She was young, maybe just out of college, with a clipboard and a practiced smile. She interviewed Maya in the kitchen while I waited in the living room with Isabella. When she finished, she told me something that made my blood run cold. "There's no record of this girl in our system. No missing persons report, no asked Maya where her parents were. She wouldn't say. She just shook her head and looked at the floor. The social worker told me Maya would need to go to a temporary shelter. But when she tried to lead Maya out the door, Maya grabbed my arm so tightly that her nails dug into my skin. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't make me go." I looked at the social worker. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the terrified girl clinging to me like I was the only anchor in her storm. And I made a decision that would change everything. "She can stay with me," I said. The social worker raised an eyebrow. "That's not really how this works. There are procedures, regulations." "I know," I said. "But she's scared. Let her stay here for a few days while we figure something out." I expected an argument. Instead, the social worker just sighed and wrote something on her clipboard. "I'll need to check in regularly," she said. "Make sure she's safe. And we'll keep trying to find her family." She left, and I closed the door behind her. For the first time in months, I had something more to worry about than just myself and Isabella. And in some strange way, that felt like relief. Maya stayed with us for 3 years. At first, it was chaos. She was traumatized and angry. She lashed out at everyone, especially Isabella. She would hoard food under her bed, eating crackers and granola bars in secret. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I didn't know how to help her. I was just a struggling single mom, not a therapist or a child psychologist. But I loved her anyway. That's what no one tells you about taking in a broken child. The love doesn't come all at once. It comes in small moments. When they finally trust you enough to eat a meal without hiding. When they stop flinching every time you raise your hand. When they laugh for the first time and you realize you haven't heard that sound from them ever before. Maya's laugh was unexpected. It came from somewhere deep, and it was full and unguarded. The first time I heard it, I cried. She started school at the beginning of the 2nd semester. She was smart, sharper than most kids her age, but she had missed so much. The teachers told me she was behind in reading and math. I spent every evening helping her catch up. We would sit at the kitchen table, surrounded by worksheets and textbooks, and I would watch her concentration deepen as she slowly understood the concepts that had once seemed impossible. The social worker visited us every month at first, then every 3 months, then eventually stopped coming. She said the case was considered stable. Maya was safe, healthy, and thriving. But the mystery of her past never fully went away. She still didn't talk about her parents. She still had the nightmares. She still sometimes looked at me like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I never pushed. I figured when she was ready, she would tell me. Isabella and Maya became sisters in the way that only children forced together by circumstance can. They argued over the TV remote. They shared clothes. They created secret languages and inside jokes. Maya looked out for Isabella at school, and Isabella helped Maya with her homework. They were the same age, but Maya had a maturity that Isabella lacked. She had seen things. She had survived things. And that pain made her watchful, protective, and fiercely loyal. By the time Maya turned 15, she had transformed into a young woman with ambition and drive. She wanted to be a lawyer. She told me this one evening while we were washing dishes together. I asked her why law, and she said because she wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I looked at her and saw the scared child on the park bench, but I also saw something else. I saw resilience and purpose. I saw a girl who had decided that her past would not define her future. But life, as it always does, threw us a curveball. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. She had been estranged from me for years, ever since I had Isabella out of wedlock. My family was traditional, conservative, and they had never forgiven me for my mistakes. But when I got the call from my aunt telling me my mother was dying, I dropped everything and went to see her. I brought Isabella and Maya with me. The visit was tense. My mother lay in a hospital bed, weak and pale, but still sharp enough to make cutting remarks about my choices. She looked at Maya and asked who the girl was. I explained that Maya was like a daughter to me. My mother just stared at me with cold, judgmental eyes. "I can see the street in her," she said. "That girl is nothing but trouble. You should have left her where you found her." The words hit me harder than I expected. I told my mother she was wrong, but she just turned away. That was the last conversation we ever had. 3 weeks later, my mother passed away. I inherited a small amount of money from her estate. Not much, but enough to make a difference. I used it to put a down payment on a small house. It wasn't fancy, but it had a backyard. The first time Isabella and Maya ran across that grass, laughing and chasing each other, I felt like I had finally built something solid. Then Maya turned 18. She had been accepted to a university in California, a full scholarship for pre-law. I was so proud that I couldn't stop crying. But there was a problem. She had no legal identity. No birth certificate, no social security number, no paperwork of any kind. She existed in a bureaucratic void. And without those documents, she couldn't accept the scholarship. She couldn't even enroll. I tried everything. I contacted the social worker who had handled her case. I visited government offices. Maya went to California. She excelled in law school. She graduated at the top of her class. And then, just like she had promised, she became a lawyer. But she didn't come back to Phoenix. She built a life on the West Coast. She married a man she met during her studies. She became a partner at a prestigious firm. And slowly, our contact faded. The last time I saw Maya before the courtroom was at my wedding to a man named David, who I met through my work. David was good to me. He helped me start my business, a property development company that grew faster than either of us expected. We built it from nothing, pouring every ounce of energy into making it successful. And it worked. We became wealthy. We hired dozens of employees. We bought properties all over the state. And then David got sick. Cancer again. The same disease that took my mother. I watched him wither and die over the course of 2 years. And when he was gone, I was left to run the company alone. I tried to sell it. I tried to step back. But the business had become my lifeline. It was what kept me going. So I worked harder than ever. And somewhere along the way, I made enemies. Rivals who wanted to tear down what I had built. Business partners who felt cheated. People who had been with me from the beginning and felt that I had forgotten them. One of them, a man named Curtis, filed a lawsuit against me. He claimed I had defrauded him out of millions. The case was going to trial, and if I lost, I would lose everything. My company, my home, my reputation, everything I had spent 20 years building. That's when Maya walked into the courtroom. I didn't even know she was there. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 7 years. I had tried to reach her when David died, but she had been in the middle of a major case in California and couldn't get away. After that, we just drifted further apart. I figured she had outgrown me, forgotten the woman who once took her in off the streets. But there she was, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. The trial had been going on for 2 weeks. Curtis's lawyers had painted a picture of me as greedy, manipulative, and dishonest. They had produced documents that looked damning. They had called witnesses who seemed credible. And the judge was beginning to look skeptical. On that final morning, I took the stand. My lawyer asked me questions designed to rebuild my credibility. I answered honestly. I explained my business dealings. I clarified every point of contention. But I could see the doubt in the faces of the jury. Then the opposing counsel cross-examined me. He was brutal. He brought up my past, my single mother struggles, my financial desperation. He made it sound like I had been scheming my entire life. I held my ground, but I felt the walls closing in. And then Maya stood up. She wasn't scheduled to testify. She wasn't even part of the case. But she approached the bench and asked the judge for permission to speak. The judge was hesitant at first, but Maya presented herself as a character witness. My lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. Maya walked to the stand, and the entire courtroom fell silent. She looked directly at me. And then she spoke. "Your Honor," she said, "this woman saved my life. When I was a child, I was homeless, abused, and alone. I had no one. And Elena Vasquez took me in. She fed me. She clothed me. She loved me like I was her own child. She had nothing, and she gave me everything." She turned to look at the jury. "I am now a partner at one of the most respected law firms in California. I have a family of my own. I have a life I never imagined possible. And I have that because of this woman. Because she chose kindness when she had every reason to turn away. Because she saw a broken girl and decided I was worth saving." She paused and pulled out a piece of paper. "I have with me financial records that prove Curtis's claims are false. Forged documents. Misrepresented transactions. He was trying to destroy Elena's empire, and he was going to get away with it." She presented the evidence to the judge. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. My lawyer quickly approached the bench to review the documents. The judge called a recess to examine the materials in his chambers. I looked at Maya, and I couldn't breathe. I had so many questions. How had she found out about the trial? How had she gotten the evidence? How had she even known? But she just smiled. A sad, knowing smile that said she had been watching all along. The recess lasted an hour. When the judge returned, he announced that the evidence was compelling enough to warrant a dismissal of the case pending further investigation. Curtis's lawyers looked panicked. The jury was dismissed. And I was free. Maya found me outside the courthouse. She was standing by a black car, looking like she had just walked off the cover of a magazine. I walked up to her, and I didn't know what to say. "You found me," I finally said. "I never lost you," she replied. "I just needed to find the right moment." The words caught in my throat. I asked her how she had gotten the evidence. She told me she had been investigating Curtis for months. A contact of hers in the financial sector had tipped her off about irregularities in his dealings. She had been gathering proof ever since. But she hadn't wanted to intervene early. She wanted to wait until the trial, until everything was on the line, so that the reveal would be undeniable. "I should have told you," she said. "But I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. You had been through so much. And I had been gone for so long." I hugged her, and I wept. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for this," I said. She pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "Elena," she said, "you don't owe me." I had no idea. And neither did Maya until she found the trail. I confronted her about it one evening at my house. We were sitting on the back porch, drinking tea, watching the sunset. The air was cool and clear. It was the kind of moment that felt like peace. "Maya," I said, "how did you find out about David?" She didn't look at me at first. She just stared out at the horizon. "I found the records," she said. "He was careful, but not careful enough. He left a paper trail." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to hurt you more than you had already been hurt. You had lost him. You had struggled to move on. And I wasn't about to rip that wound open unless I had to. But now I had to know." "What else did you find?" She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach flip. It was the same fear I had seen on that park bench. The same vulnerability. "Elena," she said, "I need you to promise me you won't shut me out after I tell you this." I nodded. She took a deep breath. "When I was investigating the family records for the hearing, I discovered something about your parents. About your mother." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Your mother," she said, "was not your biological mother. She adopted you when you were 2 years old." The world tilted. "That's not true," I said. "That's impossible." "It's true, Elena. I saw the documents. Your biological mother was a woman named Rosa who gave you up when she was 17. Your adoptive mother raised you, but she never told you the truth. And when you had Isabella out of wedlock, she disowned you because she was projecting her own shame onto you. She didn't want you to become someone like your biological mother. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My entire life, everything I knew, had just been ripped apart. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice shaking. Because I wanted to protect you, Maya said. And because I didn't think you needed to know. Not until you were ready. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for any of it. The next few months were a blur. I sought counseling. I tried to process the information Maya had given me. I attempted to find my biological mother, Rosa, but she had died years ago. I had no closure, just confusion and anger and grief. But I also had Maya. She never left my side. She rearranged her schedule, delegating her cases, so she could stay in Phoenix with me. She helped me navigate the legal mess surrounding David's secret accounts. She sat with me in therapy sessions. She listened to my rage and my sadness and never once judged me. And slowly I began to rebuild. Not just my company, but myself. I sold the business to a group of investors who promised to preserve the company's legacy. I took the money and started a foundation, the Elena Vasquez Foundation. It was designed to help homeless children, single mothers, and victims of financial fraud. It was a way to channel my pain into purpose. And Maya was right there with me. She became the foundation's legal advisor. She helped me set up structures, draft policies, and identify the children who most needed our help. We worked together for years. We became closer than we had ever been. And I learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when everything is falling apart. Now, when I think about that day in the courtroom, I don't just remember the gavel or the silence. I remember Maya's voice. I remember the look in her eyes. I remember thinking that I had done something right in a life full of wrong turns. And I remember that sometimes the people you least expect become the ones who save you. Maya still practices law in California. She comes to visit me every few months. We talk about our lives, our challenges, our hopes. She brought her children to see me last Christmas. Two beautiful, smart kids who call me Grandma. They have her eyes. They have her determination. And when I look at them, I see the scared girl on the park bench. I see the journey she took to get here. And I see the incredible woman she became. I don't know what comes next. I have had a lifetime of twists and turns. I have loved and lost, fought and survived. But if there is one thing I know for certain, it is this. The power of one act of kindness cannot be measured. It ripples outward in ways you could never predict. If I had walked past that bench, I would have lost everything. But I didn't. I stopped. I asked a question. And that question changed my life. So to anyone watching this, I want you to remember that the person you help today might one day become the person who saves you tomorrow. And not because they owe you something, but because love, when it is given freely, always finds a way to return. The courtroom was a battlefield. The stakes were impossibly high. But in the end, it wasn't the documents or the legal arguments that saved me. It was a relationship built on trust, compassion, and the simple belief that everyone deserves a second chance. That is my story. And it is the reason why I will never stop believing in the power of opening your heart to someone who has nowhere else to go. When I walked out of that courthouse, I was no longer the woman who had walked in. I had lost my mother twice, once to death and once to the truth. I had uncovered secrets about my own past that shook me to my core. I had been betrayed by the man I trusted most. But I had also gained something invaluable. I had rediscovered the one person who had always believed in me, the girl I had saved so many years ago. Maya and I had spent 20 years apart, navigating separate paths, building our own lives. But when it mattered most, we found our way back to each other. And that connection was the greatest victory of all. The company I built is gone. The fortune I accumulated has been divided. The lies that surrounded me have been exposed and left in the past. But what remains is something far more important. The peace that comes from knowing you made a difference. The assurance that somewhere in this world, someone remembers your kindness. And for me, that someone is Maya. She still calls me at least once a week. We have inside jokes. We argue about politics. We send each other recipes and book recommendations. It's not the relationship we had when she was a teenager living in my house, but it's better. It's a relationship built on mutual respect, shared history, and a love that has weathered every storm. I want to end this story with a lesson that I learned the hard way. For so many years, I believed that family was defined by blood. That my parents, my relatives, the people I grew up with, they were my only family. But that belief almost destroyed me. It kept me in toxic relationships. It made me feel inadequate. It filled me with shame and anger. But the truth is that family is not about biology. It's about who holds your hand when you're falling. It's about who shows up, even when they have every reason to stay away. It's about the people who choose you over and over again, not because they have to, but because they want to. Maya taught me that. She taught me that love is a choice. It's an action, not a feeling. And every day, she chooses me. Just like I chose her all those years ago on that quiet Phoenix street. So to those of you watching this, I want you to look at the people in your life. The ones who have been there through your darkest hours. The ones who have seen you at your worst and still stuck around. Those are the people who matter. Those are the people who will be in the courtroom with you when everything is on the line. And never, ever underestimate the power of a single act of kindness. You never know whose life you might be saving. And you never know when that saved life will come back and save yours.